Welcome, Season Sixers. As always, thank you for being part of our Color of Success podcast family. I'm your favorite host, Dr. Stephanie J. Wong. Keep your eyes peeled for my brand new book coming out. It's called Cancel the Filter, where I share my experiences in the realm of mental health, both professionally and personally. Subscribe to colorsuccesspodcast.com to be on our waiting list. Seats are limited and being filled as we speak. We're also streaming on all your favorite platforms and socials. Whether you're on the go or comfy on the couch, you can tune in at your own comfort. As you know, we love growing discussions with our guests from our AAPI and minority communities. With so many friends and experts from different aspects of life, we love learning their stories and understanding what their success means to them. Let's get into it. Juliane Taylor-Shore, aka Jules, is a therapist, author, and teacher who creates spaces for folks who want to face what's blocking them so that they can live lives full of self-trust, integrity, purpose, and connection. She came to therapy in a hard time in her life and argued with her therapist about whether or not feelings mattered. She found herself transformed by the process and went on to become a therapist herself. She dove deep into neurobiology to understand feelings and found out that, in fact, they do matter quite a bit. Now she teaches anyone who will listen about how to work with your brain to make shifts that stick and to create loving relationships with yourself and others. She wants us all to embrace our gifts and our mistakes so that we can harness the best in us to make a more creative, responsible, and compassionate world. Well, Jules, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I've been waiting for this for quite a bit of time just because our energies match, and I'm looking forward to it.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. This is awesome.
I started reading your book, looking at neurobiology and how setting boundaries can really rewire your brain. Could you tell me a little bit more about the book and what can this do for people?
Yeah, this is great. So, one, I was kind of working with clients and feeling like they were asking me, where do I go to learn about boundaries? And not feeling like I had that great info to share with them. And this was like years ago now. I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. And so before some of the great books about boundaries that have come out lately have come out. And I was thinking, well, how do you work with the brain you have to make boundaries easier? And what I started to do was realize that my clients needed internal boundary work in addition to external boundary work. So in the book, I think about boundaries in 4 ways. One is that typical way you think about boundaries, like, hey, this doesn't feel good for me. Please don't do that. If this keeps going on, this is how I'm going to help myself feel more protected or more in my value system. But what I was finding is people were needing to feel a little bit more protected in their interrelational space, which is done by something called the mentalization neural network. And so I was working with, oh, wait, how do you work with a mentalization neural network?
Yeah, please tell.
Right? So this is
the explanation needed.
Right? So this area, it's not like, don't think of the brain in parts, think of it more like systems. So this system in your brain is embedded a little bit lower. It works very, very, very fast. And it's guessing all the time what's happening in the other person's mind. Like right now, I'm guessing what's happening in your mind and you're guessing what's happening in mine. And this, if you know that somebody feeling bad about you, or let's say you said no, and then they felt terrible, and then that's your fault. Oh, your mentalization neural network is the part of your brain that's guessing, oh, you did something really bad right now.
It's almost like scolding yourself, right?
Exactly.
Like an internalization of guilt or that you've done harm to somebody.
Exactly. And I'm not saying somebody wouldn't be hurt by hearing a no. Sometimes they would be. But this internalization of, ooh, I should be able to get in there and help you feel and think something in particular, or you should be able to get in here and help me feel and think something in particular. That's all living in there. And depending on your context, where you come from, you might be guessing, whoop, I should be able to make you feel good all the time. Or I want you to help me feel good all the time. And in order to be really connected, it helps to have a little bit more of a separation. Because when I can see your emotional process as you journeying through time, making sense of your world, I can protect your mind from my mind. Then I don't try to get in there and try to get you to feel something other than what you're feeling. Okay. And if I can listen with discernment, like everything you're saying is totally true for you, but maybe not everything you're saying is about me. Yeah. Not everything you're saying is true for me. We may disagree. When we can make that feel a little bit safer, it's way easier to be authentic and say more about what's okay for you and not okay for you. So I was thinking about that and I took a deep dive into the mentalization neural network, and I found out that most of what's called its afferent wiring, which just means where is it getting its information from, is coming from your viscera, from your heart area and your belly area. Mm. And it speaks in image and metaphor rather than in words. So I thought, oh, you know what you could do is you could listen to your belly and heart as they're holding, oh, it's okay for us to be different. It's okay for you to have your feelings. Yeah.
And I think that comes down to self-compassion. And I think that's the key that makes your model slightly different, in that when we're talking about boundaries, a lot of times we think, oh my God, we're going to feel free. And I tell people, like, it may not be that easy. The other person may not take it in the best way. You may be viewed in a certain way. And after you set the boundary, you're going to be viewed maybe in a different way that is not so pleasant. And so if a script has already been written for many years and then you put your foot down, it's kind of like, well, who is this person? You've changed, and which could be the point, but it's not always clear cut and people aren't always going to respect it. So can you talk a little bit more about how do you even begin this process and really create that safe space for yourself and the other person?
Right. So one, I think about space as protected rather than only safe. Because the truth is, we don't always feel all the way safe, but can we add a little bit of care?
That's a good point.
And so I'm thinking about self-compassion a ton here. Can I be holding myself in deep, warm regard? Can I be kind to me while I listen for what is authentic for me in this space? And then allow for separateness, allow for a differentiation, if you will, between me and the other person, so that it's okay. And I have a ton of compassion for them simultaneously. I think when we have a ton of compassion for both of us at the same moment, a clear and kind way to set a boundary comes up really easily. It's like, oh, that's what I mean. And it comes up for my clients, it comes up over and over and over again in a very nuanced way. So when we have this, if I work with somebody and they have a little bit of what I call a containing boundary, so a pause between what I feel and what I do, that's held with compassion. All the research out there is showing us, if you want big behavioral change, use self-compassion. It works slower, but it does hold longer. It makes for better behavioral change if you're being kind to you. Why on earth would that be? Because I'm regulating my system with a neurochemical called GABA. And it just, think about it like this. It calms the lower brain down, like, shh. So the second I'm kind to me, I go shh to my lower brain. And the second I'm kind to you, right? At the same time, without needing for you to feel a certain way. So I protect myself with this different space, like, oh, it's okay with me if you're feeling something that's kind of rocky, it's kind of sticky. Mm-hmm. Then we can make it through this sticky moment together, and I can stay in a practice of compassion. So the book is full of these little practices that if you stack them together, it works with your prefrontal cortex connection to your subcortical. It works with your mentalization network. It works with an area of your brain called your basal ganglia, which is a part that does procedural movement and works very, very, very fast. So we put all of these things together, we stack them together, and then I come up with a plan where I can really soothe myself when I say, here's what's okay with me. Here's what's not okay with me. Here's what I'm going to do next. And then they have a response. And I have all these practices in place. Then even when the response is a little bit harder, I can still soothe me and still respect them and be okay, even through a really, really hard moment.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times one of the hardest things is, what if when you set boundaries with all the self-compassion, all the empathy, all the compassion towards others, and this person just stops talking to you?
Oh, that's a rough moment, right?
And I know I don't want you to overgeneralize, but it is a reality of setting boundaries, even in the kindest way possible.
Even in the kindest way possible. We cannot control what another person does. So one thing I'm wanting to help people hold is this really hard thing I think we have to hold as humans, is you do have a ton of influence and absolutely no control.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. So I can't control how you're going to respond. I can keep coming back. I can ask, but after a certain point, if someone decides to exit the relationship, there is nothing I can do. If their truth is, I can't keep in relationship with you if this is your boundary, then that tells me a lot of information about what's going on with them. And if I can stay in a kind, curious space around that, I could even maybe come to a space of understanding it, but that does not take the grief away. I'm not one of those fairy tale-y sort of people around boundaries. I actually want us to embrace the grief because it's real. But the thing is, sometimes, how do I say it? I think sometimes we've only got really hard roads in front of us. And I'm thinking of different moments in my own life when I have betrayed me so that I didn't hurt you. And sometimes, because I wanted to take care of you, because I want to take care of your feelings, right? And so I think sometimes we have to choose, and I can't tell anyone what the right choice is for them. Sometimes me being a little less authentic to myself and flexing that boundary is the best option. And sometimes setting a boundary is the best option. And if I am doing that, sometimes the outcome is an ending or a real shift. I'm thinking about how often it's a real shift in the dynamic of the relationship that's kind of permanent.
Yeah, they may feel less close, if not, completely not talking to each other, but there's a sense of some sense of disconnection.
Yeah, exactly. And that is part of it sometimes. And so I never take that decision to set a boundary lightly, because I can't tell you if it's okay for you to live with that potential consequence, because it may not be.
And the judgment in people to continue to stay in a relationship or not, or accept certain things, is really a choice with that person. And so I think what you and I align on is that there's a lot of intersectionality when you're setting boundaries. And so there's a lot of cultural differences or similarities in terms of how we're setting them. And I shared this with another person that I had on the show, like, when I used to tell my in-laws when I used to live with them, hey, Dad, I just need a little bit of space. He's like, okay, we'll just move out. And we're just like, no, that's not what we're talking about. Like there's literal words used in different generations that mean very different things.
Right.
I just meant, can we not talk while I'm brushing my teeth in the bathroom? Like,
yeah. I actually wanted the 5 minutes.
Exactly. Or can we not like talk over this like 10 minutes of TV time after work? But anyways, so that thought about intersectionality, how do you kind of conceptualize that or navigate that? You did a really nice job of pointing out privilege in the beginning of the book.
Oh, great. I'm glad it landed like that. That was my hope. So I know that I have no idea what boundary would be right for any other person. So my first thought is to be thinking about, where do you sit in your context? And where do other people who you're going to be talking to, what do you know about their context? And can we find a way, and this is really inner work. I do a lot of pause, find a why. What's your big why about why you might want to do something different than you're doing? And then 2, can we double check your integrity? If you thought about saying this out loud, how would you like to say it? And then imagining, now we do use our mentalization network to guess what's going to happen in the other one. In their context, how is it that they're going to hear that? And is that okay with you? Right? And how are you going to respond if they respond? I'm thinking about the example you just gave. Yeah. Can we make a little, I didn't mean forever move out. I meant like 5 minutes here. And how can we navigate this together? Even though I'm talking about it, I'm thinking about how many younger people I work with whose parents are not used to this kind of direct communication.
Or even differences in languages,
Exactly.
English being a second language or immigrant parents, and how there's a different understanding of even just one word.
Yes, exactly. And so when I'm with someone, I'm always wondering, from your context, how does this land? As far as you know from this other person's context, how is this going to land? And making some guesses ahead of time. For me, a lot of the boundary work is around preparation. So that when you're actually having the conversation, you're a little bit more used to practicing. So practice makes progress. And it turns out that here's a really fun experiment that some folks did a while back. So they were having people look at a magician pulling a tablecloth and keeping the dishes on the table. And they had a bunch of people watch it on YouTube, and they had the other half of the people go into the studio and be with the magician. And they asked both groups, do you think you could do it? Could you pull the tablecloth? And the group that was actually in there physically with the magician, that practiced, they said, there's no way I'm going to be able to do it. And about half of them could. The people who just watched it on the video, 100% of them thought they could do it, and 100% of them failed. So I really want to lean in to practicing it. And as a therapist, I might work through and role play that. Like, how would you like me to show up? What might they say? Let's practice through it. But even if you're on your own, you can use your imagination to practice it, just like the basketball players who practice the free throws and get better anyway, even though they did not physically do it. So I want to be very conscientious that my context, whatever looks like healthy boundaries in my life, is not projected onto anybody else's life, because I cannot possibly know what's authentically right for you. So I have a lot of exploration inside about, how is the language difference going to sit? How is this going to, what does your parent know about emotion? What's their relationship with emotion? What does that mean about what you want to say? Do you want to contain your language more, or do you want to share more? And what's your hope in doing that? And then what happens if you don't get your hope? Can we sit with the grief of that, even if it's a mini grief?
That's really well said. And I want to unpack a couple things there, which
Mm-hmm.
is that there's a sense of cultural humility that you're speaking about as well when you're working with
Mm-hmm.
patients. And you're really giving them the opportunity to look at their own cultural context and
Mm-hmm.
identities. There's also this visualization piece. The nice part of the free throw shooter analogy is like you're visualizing success and
Mm-hmm.
also figuring out, okay, if my elbow shifts a little bit or my words are different, what are the different options?
Yeah.
And
And I
also
try to
practice.
help people come up with mini context. Okay, what if they
Right.
said this version? What if they said that
Mm-hmm.
version? What are all the different ways this might show up?
And
Yeah.
practicing, like you said, like it
Mm-hmm.
may feel a little bit awkward to practice out loud when you're by yourself, but what it does is it helps you not stumble around your words so much when the day of the big game.
The day of the big game. And I also like to help people understand that when they're practicing boundaries, especially if they're brand new to them, your family of origin is going to be the hardest place for you to practice this. So make lots of room inside yourself to be stumbly around it if that's where you want to set your boundary. And it may be easier to practice with friends or with coworkers if you're brand new to boundary setting, because it helps you have a little bit of that. Ooh, that was hard, but I actually did okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think of success as the conversation didn't feel sticky. I think of success as I honored myself and the other person in a way that felt good to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then the conversation went how it went. But
So
I stuck to my own integrity. Does that make sense?
mm-hmm. So there are a lot of exercises in the book, which I love because you can
Mm-hmm.
literally walk yourself through a lot of these scenarios and use the skills. And
Mm-hmm.
so, one question that people may have is, well, obviously it's not an overnight process. So how long would it take to change your neurobiology and your mental network and things like that? Because, people like quick fixes and this is not something that you can just,
Yeah.
okay, we'll set a boundary. Things are running smoothly. Our neural networks are great.
Right, exactly. So this gets to skill practice state trait. So I have terrible news for people who like really fast fixes. There are none for your brain. Your neural networks have been doing what they've been doing for a really long time. We're talking about slowly shifting pathways over time. So, one, let's say you were practicing a new skill, like a soothing gesture, a compassion gesture for yourself. And I've had people do everything from something obvious looking, like they put their hand on their heart, to something very subtle, like rubbing the tip of their thumb to the edge of their finger. And that was it. And they did that under the table. And that was the thing that reminded them to be a little bit kind to themselves. So that would be a brand new skill. So let's say, oh, I've embedded a little bit of compassion into a gesture. So I'm using my compassion networks and my basal ganglia to lock that home. That's a brand new skill I've never used before. Okay, now it's going to take about 3 to 4 weeks of practicing that skill many times every single day to hone a brand new network. And then it's going to take another 2 to 3 years to have that become a habit.
You really
Sorry.
have to have dedication and investment. And I think that's the point. I'm glad we're bringing this up because
Mm-hmm.
the good news is many people may think, okay, my neural networks are pretty set after childhood, adolescence,
Mm-hmm.
and I go into adulthood, right? But there's a whole span of a lifetime where in the larger scheme of things, I mean, if you are healthy and
Yeah.
keeping with your mental and physical health, that is a small speck in the larger lifespan. So even though it seems like, oh my God, it's going to take 2 to 3 years to do this, that is still a very short period of time comparison to the larger lifespan. And to break it up into these habit forming behaviors is kind of the bite-sized approach to it.
Right, right. And it does take commitment because you're not going to see immediate results. This is not the kind of thing where all of a sudden I do this thing and, oh, everything is amazing. It's more, I'm going to do this practice. And then sometimes it's going to feel like it works really well for me. And sometimes it won't because that moment was harder. And then I'm going to practice and practice and practice. But I'm thinking about a friend of mine who has a self-compassion gesture that's this finger, she rubs her thumb and her forefinger together. And I was talking to her about really committing to this practice. And she said, well, the crazy thing about it was that I was having a difficult moment with my husband in the car. And I looked down and my hand was doing this thing.
Mm.
And then I thought, what does that mean? Oh, yeah, it means compassion. And she said, and then I looked at him and I wasn't even mad anymore. I was actually really curious about why he was so upset. Oh my gosh, this is so crazy. And it did it for me. And I said, okay, great. So how long did it take from the first moment you started practicing it to having that automatically happen? She said, about 9 months. It's like, yep, sounds about right. About 9 months. And she really committed to regular practice. So the more you practice, the faster these neural networks are going to get honed. But it does take patience and really big commitment in the face of delayed response, delayed gratification, delayed sense that things are going to get better.
Well, 9 months in the larger scheme of a marriage too.
Oh my gosh, it's so much easier.
That's great.
Exactly. Yeah. And she's told me recently, she said, even now I still have to actively remember it, but now that I've honed the network, it's so easy to access. I just do it and then it's there and I can listen to him because that's about him and not take it so personally. And he's telling me we're more connected. And that's the report I'm getting from people who are practicing these things all the time in my work. For the last several years, it's been really consistent.
So what would be your overall message? Because there's a lot in the book, but what are you hoping people like that takeaway message from all of the learnings that you're giving away in the book?
That boundaries are going to bring you into deeper connection with yourself and with each other. That if you really want nuanced, intimate connection, boundaries are the way forward.
So I realize that I'd like you to just even say the title of your book and where people can buy it and all that good stuff.
Yes, I would love to. It's called Setting Boundaries That Stick: How Neurobiology Can Help You Rewire Your Brain to Feel Safe, Connected, and Empowered. And you can Google Setting Boundaries That Stick, and that's fine. And you can also find more information about the book and read a little bit about the 4 boundary types that I break down and all that at my website, which is julianetaylorshore.com.
Thank you so much, Jules, for spending your Friday with me. And there are just so many things that I know for quite a bit of time that we're going to talk about. But anything else that I didn't ask that you'd like to share, or any other upcoming projects that you have?
Oh, thanks. You know what? First, thank you so much for having me on. And I just love your podcast. I'm such a fan. And thank you for all the work you're doing. It's awesome. And what am I doing? I have boundary workshops coming up. So if folks like the kinds of things I'm saying and they want to work in small groups, I do groups of only 10 in my office at a time, and we work through our boundaries together. And I really want to make it incredibly welcoming to all genders, cultural backgrounds, contexts, wherever you're coming from. We're trying to create a space where we're collaborating together to support each other and working on our boundaries.
I love that. And we can all check that out on your website. And I think the best thing is really being able to get real-time feedback from people. That's the power of group work.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much. And please, let's keep in touch.
Yes, let's do. Thanks so much for having me on.
Join us next week for my sit down with Alan Jenkins, who is a Harvard law professor and a graphic novelist. He shares his perspective on justice and ways that graphic novels can communicate social commentary. He also identifies the resources needed to decrease incarceration and reincarceration